Cruella De Vil.
Hello and welcome back to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast where we're taking a look at what it really means to be an animated classic and whether Walt Disney himself really knew what he was talking about. My name is Liam, and as always I'm joined by my very good friend Ben. Ben, what are we taking a look at this week?
This week, Liam, we're looking at the 1961 film 101 Dalmatians, based on the Dodie Smith novel of the same name. It was the 17th film in the Animated Classics roster. Liam, what are your thoughts going into this film?
You might remember from last episode that I considered Sleeping Beauty to be one of the three most beautiful 2D animated Disney films. I think this might be the ugliest 2D animated Disney film.
Wow. Okay. Why do you think that?
Well, we'll get to that in a moment, and I will say it's not all bad. There are some elements to the animation I really like, but if you're not familiar with this film, it was produced in a very different way to any of the Disney films before it, and it has a very distinct effect on the overall look of the film, and it is a look that doesn't sit very well with me.
Yeah, I think we're definitely into the 1960s style of Disney animation. I think part of it was from the huge success of Sleeping Beauty. Admittedly, that was going for a specific medieval European influenced art style, whereas this and the Aristocats and a few other films, they're going for more of a general sort of scratchy, rough look. And we're going to see a lot more of this throughout the 60s and into the 70s before we get back to a more clean look in the 80s.
Talking about the 60s, I do just want to point out that right from the opening credits, I'm amazed how very 60s this film feels, especially considering it was only made in 1961. It feels like something that would have been made more towards the tail end, maybe after Beatlemania. But no, this film predates the Beatles.
Well, since we're talking about the credits then, let's start going through 101 Dalmatians. And you're absolutely right. The opening goes for a bit more of a stylized credit sequence compared to most of the other films we've seen, which are just a few title cards or the classic Walt Disney fairy tale book opening. This has Pongo and Perdita, the two main Dalmatians, moving between different images in London. We get a lot of examples of cell animation and rough drawings and things like that, and there's this recurring theme of the black spots of the Dalmatians taking over. And throughout all this, I've just written the words, also, jazz.
Yeah, it's a very jazzy opening. I really like the spots forming the musical notes. I think that's really nice. The copy-pasting of the sketches of the dogs, I think, doesn't work because it is just a little bit too scratchy. So people will often refer to the ages of Disney, and everything we've seen so far has been referred to as the golden age of Disney, and this is something that a lot of people call the dark age of Disney, but that's quite loose and it doesn't quite include all of the films in the 60s and 70s because there's some genuinely very good ones in here. I actually prefer to refer to this as the Xerox Era, and that's because our old friend Ub Iwerks developed a method for using a photocopier to transfer artists' sketches directly onto the animation cells. So the usual process of animation is the artist will sketch, they will send that over to inkers, who will then overlay an animation cell and draw the hard black outlines over this sketch. By using a photocopier, essentially Ub Iwerks had managed to cut out an entire third of the animation process. And you could go straight from artist sketches to the painters who could then fill in the animation cells. That said, the process is very much in its infancy, and when you take an artist's sketch, which is quite rough as it is, and you apply the Xeroxing process, the end result are very scratchy lines that can often be broken, and there is often a lot of dust that has been picked up around it, whether it is from the sketching process and you have marks from the pencils, or even within the photocopying process itself. And that's what results in this very specific style we have of sketchy broken lines, because what we're looking at is actually the artist's sketches, not a copy of them by an inker.
I know you said this is a style that you really dislike, and I feel it's one of those that people will go either way on. I suspect there's some people who this is their absolute favourite art style of Disney, and there's people like yourself, Liam, who detest it. I have mixed feelings about it. I wouldn't want it as sort of the standard Disney look, but at the same time I always give more credit for something that's new and maybe doesn't quite work perfectly than just trotting out the same stuff over and over, so I give it a lot of credit for that.
I will say, it's not the art style I have a problem with, it is the art process I have a problem with. I think the character designs are really quite interesting, but by having the sketchy, broken lines that look like a bad photocopy because they're a bad photocopy, I think that does detract from the film compared to what it would have been like if they'd animated it in the traditional way. That said, if they'd animated it in the traditional way, it would have been a lot more expensive and maybe we wouldn't have had the film that we got.
What you're saying is it's not the quality of Cinderella's sponge.
No, and I think that shows a lot throughout the film. I'm always looking at it and thinking, this doesn't quite look right, and it is because I'm looking at a photocopy of a sketch. There is actually one artistic choice that I do just straight up despise, and it's to do with the backgrounds. You may have noticed, but the backgrounds tend to be block-filled, and whoever's doing the painting, they're clearly not sticking to the lines. It is very much a stylistic choice. This is what I say about it being a very 60s movie, because it reminds me of the pop art movement.
No, Liam, that's what London looked like in the 60s. They hadn't mastered painting buildings or even building walls straight. It was just a load of weird buildings squished together with no windows.
There is a lamp in the background of one scene, and it is a rough, broken sketch of a lamp. And then the way they've coloured it in is it's just a brown rectangle covering more than the area of the lamp. And I just think it looks so ugly and is so distracting. And that isn't because of the artistic process. That is a creative choice. And as I say, this feels like a film of the 60s. And this is the only one of the Disney films that makes that creative choice. I think after this, they tend to stick to more traditionally coloured backgrounds, but for this, I just find it very distracting and very ugly.
In its defence, we talked a lot in the Sleeping Beauty podcast about how gorgeous and overwrought the backgrounds are in that, how they almost dominate what's going on in the foreground. So I don't think it's unreasonable to go in the complete opposite direction and say, we're going to make the background so weird and almost lazy and messy that you're only going to focus on what's going on in terms of animation. I think that's, I'm not going to say a good decision, but I think it's a reasonable one to make, and it's reasonable to experiment in that sense.
I will say in my defence, Walt Disney agrees with me. The artistic director of this film, Ken Anderson, actually fell out with Walt Disney over the look of this film. This was a point where Walt Disney himself was focused more on the parks and building a kind of legacy, and he'd grown disillusioned with animation, so he sort of said to the team, you can do whatever you like, we'll see how it goes. And he didn't like the end result. So much so that it wasn't until Walt Disney's deathbed that he finally said to Ken Anderson, that thing you did with 101 Dalmatians, it was all right. That's how you know the animation is ugly. If it's something that was not resolved between these two people until a deathbed moment.
His last words were, 101 Dalmatians, the animation was okay. Kurt Russell's the future. Freeze me under Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the three things he said, then he instantly died.
I always forget about the Kurt Russell thing.
Should we explain that?
If you're not familiar, one of the last written memos, I believe, from Walt Disney was just the words Kurt Russell on a piece of paper. And as a result, Kurt Russell just appeared in loads of weird live action films throughout the 70s.
I think it's important to note that Disney knew Kurt Russell at this point. It wasn't some premonition of Escape from New York. We were talking about the plot of this film.
Yes. So we open on the ugliest shot of London.
I feel you're baiting me there. You're trying to let me think of an example of London where it looks uglier, and I can't think of one straight away. So fine.
We open on the ugliest shot of London, and then it zooms in, and we meet Pongo and his owner, that he refers to as his pet, Roger.
One of the main conceits in this film is the narration's all done by Pongo, and the way him and Perdita and the other dogs talk about the humans is as if they were pets. The opening joke is that you get this very posh, well-spoken English, gentlemanly voice talking about living in London as a bachelor, and it zooms in on Roger, and the Dalmatians there, and then the joke is that it's actually the Dalmatian talking. Fine. The main plot point for this opening section is that Roger and Pongo are both bachelors, and Pongo wants to try and set Roger up. So, being the proactive go-getter he is, he literally looks out the window to see what women are available. So the joke here is, there's a couple of jokes. One is that all the owners look like their dogs. So there's a long-haired art student who looks like... Is it a red setter? Is that what that dog is?
I believe it's a red setter.
Yeah, and then there's like a fairly stuck-up looking woman who looks like a bulldog, etc. So I get the joke is that he's looking at the dogs, but he's also looking at the women, but talking about them as if they're dogs. I'm like, I kind of get it, haha, but also this is just a man looking at women and literally talking about them as if they're dogs.
My favourite part of this is the final punchline where he sees a puppy being walked by a young girl and just says, "Too young." And I'm thinking, just cut it out. Doesn't need to be there.
That's it. He's like, too old, because there's like an old lady, and then he's like, oh, too young, there's a little girl with a puppy. And then it moves on to Anita and Perdita. But yeah, you're just like, no, hang on, go back a sec. Why were you... Creepy dog. The only note I've written in this section is, God, everyone's so posh in this film.
Yeah, this is a very upper middle class film, to the point where there is a moment where they're describing the house they move into and they say, oh, it's a small little house, good for two couples just starting out. And I'm thinking, it's a townhouse in London. Fuck you.
I wrote exactly the same thing. They describe it as a modest little place. I'm like, nowadays a modest little place in London is literally sharing a bed with someone and paying for the privilege.
Before we get to the moving in, though, we have quite a nice little meet cute arranged by Pongo where he drags Roger to the park in order to meet with Anita and Perdita.
Even though we discussed the phrase meet cute in length in the Bambi episode, I was still thrown off then when you said it. I can't get my head around that phrase. I don't know what's wrong with me.
I've never quite understood how it works. They're two words that don't form a proper noun, really.
It's the double T. They trip over each other. Sorry.
I think this is quite a nice little meet cute. I only have one note about this section, which is the animators can't make their mind up about what colour Anita's hair is going to be.
I hadn't noticed that watching it, but thinking back, yeah, you're absolutely right. Oh, she's sort of like a blondie, gingery, brownie colour.
I think it changes 4 times in total, and it's only during this scene. After this point in the film, they've settled on strawberry blonde, I think. But up until this point, it's just changing. Every time it cuts back to her, she's got a different hair colour.
Like Ramona Flowers. But, you know, just laziness. After the park section then, we see the two couples in their domestic life. Roger trying to make his living as a songwriter. One thing that's a bit weird is that it's kind of implied through some of the comments Anita makes and Cruella makes mockingly later on that Roger's not really making any money. And they talk about, oh, they don't really have much money. You know, they've only got enough for one maid. How are they living? The Darlings could only afford a dog.
I consistently get very angry at this couple for just seeming to coast through life and be successful just because they had the sheer dumb luck to be born wealthy and white in the 60s.
Classic boomers. Roger and Anita boomer. We can only afford to keep these 17 pedigree dogs. Sorry.
You mentioned Nanny. They have a live-in maid called Nanny, and I don't think she has a name. There is a moment coming up which you can imagine would be quite an emotional moment, and Roger calls out to Nanny and Anita, and I'm thinking, in that situation, I would refer to someone by their name.
Maybe that is her name. Little baby Nanny.
So yes, we have the two couples living in their modest home with the live-in help, and we discover that Perdita is pregnant.
Which prompts a visit from Anita's friend, ? Cruella De Vil. Now, in my head, I think I was conflating it with both the live-action film with Glenn Close and also, to a lesser extent, the film The Devil Wears Prada, and thinking Cruella De Vil kind of worked with her, or they were colleagues, but I think it's just implied they're old school friends.
I think they are friends from university because I think it's shown that Anita works in fashion, so you can assume that they train together.
Despite the fact Cruella is clearly 30 years older than Anita.
Maybe it's just the smoking.
I don't know what she's smoking, but it is green.
It is aging her ridiculously. So I do definitely have some positives about this film, and I think one of the big positives is the character design. I love the character design of Cruella De Vil. Again, she's a very 60s feeling character, and it feels so strange to me to be watching a film just at the start of that decade that seems to capture so much of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. She's almost a parody of how models look, I guess. Like, she's got ridiculously sharp cheekbones. She's got, obviously, the high fashion haircut and, obviously, the furs, which she's famous for. I think the only disappointing thing about Cruella, really, is that she doesn't get a huge amount to do. In popular culture, she's very much a bit of a touchstone, like a character like Scrooge, where people go, oh, that person's a bit of a Cruella De Vil type. But really, all she does is just come in and shout at everyone and then storms off again. You've got Disney characters like Hook or Ratigan or Clayton, and they're characters who there's clearly anger simmering away underneath, but it comes to the fore at the climax. Cruella is constantly furious at everything.
She also famously is probably one of the least redeemable villains. There is nothing the audience can relate to or understand about her motivations. She just wants a coat made of dogs, which is barbaric.
Barbaric, you might say. Thank you.
Alongside the character design, there is something in this scene that I think is absolutely fantastic. Did you notice anything about Cruella De Vil's car?
It's a Mercedes-Benz. That's about the only thing I can remember about it.
So for all my talk about it being an ugly film, I do think the car itself doesn't look great, but there's something off about the car when you watch these scenes. If you haven't seen this film in a while, check out any scene with Cruella where her car is moving, and you can see it moving throughout the streets, and the angles change a lot, which again is very hard to achieve without 3D animation, which we didn't have at this point. Cruella De Vil's car, and I believe looking at it, Jasper and Horus's car, what you're often looking at is a cardboard model.
Really?
So they made a cardboard replica with harsh black lines on all the edges. And whenever you see the car in motion, every frame, they've put it within the capture device and are moving it frame by frame. So what you're actually looking at is a 3D model. It's incredible.
That's absolutely crazy. I've seen this film God knows how many times, and I never knew that.
It's something that really stood out when I watched it a couple of years ago, because I was thinking, has this been edited in remasters? Because it looks like you're looking at a piece of 3D animation, which is bizarre for a film made in 1961. So I looked into the method, and it's a physical model, and it's fantastic that they would do something like that.
My only other point on Cruella is I feel this film is maybe the worst offender out of all the Disney films for good characters looking nice and evil characters looking bad. At first I thought it was more a class thing, because Jasper and Horus, who we'll come to in a moment, who are kind of the henchmen, they sort of look like these grotesque figures, and I thought it was a bit of a classist thing. But then Cruella De Vil's implied to be a member of the aristocracy, maybe, or at least from that blooded background. And her, Jasper and Horus all look horrendous, whereas Anita and Roger and Nanny, I don't think we see any other human characters, no major ones anyway. They all just look charming and lovely. It's such a ridiculous dichotomy.
Before we move on from Cruella, we don't quite have a full-blown villain song, but we do have a villain who has a musical theme.
I think it's fair to say whenever anyone hears Cruella De Vil, that song is instantly in their head.
It's pretty great, considering it's so simple, just this nice little jazzy number that they threw a couple of words at. It really gets stuck in your head. Even now as we're talking about her, I've been playing it in my head.
And Cruella's appearance and then subsequent rapid disappearance, after barging in demanding to see the puppies, inspires Roger to make her the subject of his new song, which we'll come back to because there's some weird stuff on that. Perdita's having second thoughts about having puppies, but Pongo reassures her, and we flash forward a few weeks when it's the night of her giving birth. It's a stormy night, and Nanny and Anita and Perdita are just in the other room whilst Pongo and Roger I was going to say are smoking their pipes. Pongo's not smoking a pipe. Roger's smoking a pipe.
Whenever I watch this film, I always forget that Perdita doesn't give birth to 99 puppies.
Poor dog. Jeez. So I don't know how well people remember this scene, but Nanny's running back and forth and saying how many puppies are being born, and she gets up to 15 and then comes back through and says 14, we lost one. And it's a very sad moment, and she gives it to Roger, and Roger's like, hang on, and he just starts rubbing it until it comes back to life. I don't think that's how anything works. I'm not exaggerating. He rubs the dead body, it comes back to life.
I was wondering if he thought that was going to work. Because Pongo is sat next to him looking very sad, and Roger just starts rubbing this presumably dead puppy, as if he's trying to make a wish.
Maybe it works. Maybe it's a thing of, like...
getting their heart beating, or, yeah.
It's restoring the circulation. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a vet, despite what some people claim.
It is something that has always stuck in my head, and I've always wanted to... I've wanted to try it out. I've always felt prepared that in that situation I would feel comfortable trying it out. Let's say I had a dog that had puppies and one of them didn't make it. My first reaction would be to start rubbing it.
Which, if that's not a thing, you're going to look nuts when you just pick up a dead puppy and start rubbing it, and the vet's just, what the hell are you doing?
So we end up with the 15 puppies. Cruella immediately returns trying to buy them. She's first horrified that the Dalmatian puppies don't have spots. I think the acting in this scene is very good. I do really like the characterization of Cruella De Vil. I just think she doesn't have that much substance. What's there is great. I just wish there was more to her.
She's no Hook, for sure. But then who is, other than Hook? So Cruella offers to pay what is implied to be a huge amount of money for these puppies, and Roger refuses, and Anita just kind of goes along with it. Anita's a bit wet when she's around Cruella, let's be honest. And Cruella says, well, how could you possibly afford to keep 15 puppies? And they say, oh, we'll find a way. See my previous point about they're literally making no money and paying a maid and living in London. But fine, whatever. We cut forward to, I guess, a couple of months later when the puppies are a bit older. They can talk now. So I guess they're older. They can talk to other dogs, just to be clear. They're not talking puppies.
And we start to see that some of these puppies have their own distinct personalities. I don't think they quite come up with 15. I think there's maybe 4 that they show to be characters.
I think 4 is generous for personalities. One of them, his defining characteristic is he's fat and hungry.
I was going to say, the only note I have on the character of Roly is that I'm so sick of fat-based jokes at the moment.
It's not even a joke. It's just every scene he just goes, I'm hungry, Mama. I'm hungry. Shut up.
They could probably only get that child actor to record the one line, so they just reused it over and over.
Well, they did a poor job of it. If you're listening, child voice actors, me and Liam don't have time for it, alright?
Yeah, so there's not too much to the puppies. They didn't really want to flesh them out very much.
Well, Cruella did, sorry.
Wow. But this scene isn't all bad. There's something I really like about this scene, which is we have the dogs watching TV, and they're watching a show about a dog, where I presume the audience, it's aimed at people, but the dogs love it. And the reason I question whether it's aimed at people is because immediately after the TV show, we're greeted to a commercial for dog treats that is aimed at dogs.
I mean, on the one hand, it works because the dogs watch it feverishly. But on the other side, it doesn't work because dogs don't have money.
This is what I don't understand. The words of the commercial are, if you eat canine crunchies, you can be a champion too. Surely it should be, if you feed your dog canine crunchies, they will be a champion.
Maybe it works on humans too, we don't know.
Maybe it's in the dog language, and it's just a series of barks, and the humans watch it and are just like, I have no idea.
Just a series of high-pitched noises just outside of a human's range of hearing. On the subject of this advert, I haven't even written a note on this because I know I didn't need to. I've had the Canine Crunchy song stuck in my head for the last 24 hours because it's so damn catchy.
There's not many songs in this film, but I think they're all pretty good and pretty catchy.
After the TV show then, the puppies are put to bed. Pongo and Perdita are taken out for their evening walk, and we find out that Jasper and Horus, two, I guess, just East End ne'er-do-wells, have been asked to steal the puppies. What are your thoughts on Jasper and Horus?
When we first see them, they're both reading the Daily Mail, which tells me everything I need to know about them.
They're very strange characters, I feel. It's worth noting that Jasper is literally twice the height of Horus. And Horus is 4 times the width of Jasper.
It's the classic duo of round and pointy. As in, one is round and one is pointy. Not, they're both round and pointy.
The classic existential confusion of round and pointy.
I think Jasper and Horus are one of the better elements of this film, but again, there's not much to them. I'm interested when they're on the screen, but that's because I'm not interested in anything else that's happening.
Yeah, I don't think we've really addressed it yet, but I feel this film, stuff happens quite a lot, but there's not really that much of a plot. I mean, we've dragged it out quite a while describing what happened, but honestly, my notes fizzle out fairly quickly after this point.
There is a moment coming up where I've just stopped making notes because my brain just tunes out every time.
Well, let's keep moving then. So, Jasper and Horus, they force their way in past Nanny, they steal the puppies, Nanny's devastated and runs out into the street. One thing I do like about this scene is when Jasper and Horus are planning the crime, Jasper says to Horus, "I've got the knob for this job," and I just sort of raised my eyebrows to myself.
I think he says nog.
Sometimes I think I hear what I want to hear.
There's something I really like after this scene where we cut to the next day's papers, which are reporting on the puppy kidnapping because crime in London at the time was apparently very rare. But there is a picture of Nanny.
I wrote this too. Sorry, you finished the point, but yeah.
There is a picture of Nanny sat by an empty puppy basket looking sad, and I'm just imagining the photographer having to set that shot up.
It's so funny, I wrote exactly the same thing. They go round and, they're like, "Oh, can we have a photo of the puppies on the cover of the paper?" No, that won't sell. What we need is an old woman looking sad at an empty crib. So surreal.
And it's at this point that Roger is very quick to blame Cruella De Vil, and Anita dismisses this and says Scotland Yard investigated her already within the day and ruled her out as a suspect. And at this point, we're led to believe that the humans they've run out of options for finding the puppies. So it's up to the dogs. And it's at this point that the film becomes an animal adventure story. And it's also at this point that my brain turns off.
Let's move forward then. So, very briefly, what happens is there's something called the Twilight Bark. And I do think this is a nice idea. Basically, the idea is that when dogs are barking at night and you can hear them throughout a city, they're actually sending messages for each other. Pongo sends out a message across London asking about the missing puppies, and that spreads out and out until it reaches all the way to the countryside. It seems to mostly be spread by dogs from Lady and the Tramp that are doing cameos.
The animation has actually been reused here, and you can tell. Well, I'm not sure. It could be that they photocopied the sketches, but the lines look a lot sharper on these dogs, and I think they've literally just taken the animation cells, which were drawn traditionally, and they've just inserted them into this film, and it looks odd as a result.
I feel there's 2 schools of thought approaching this. You can either say this is a clever little nod to Lady and the Tramp and say, "Hey, we're doing another dog film," or it's laziness. I'll let you decide.
Can I also just say, you say that the Twilight Bark is this really nice idea. I say it's 6.5 minutes of dogs barking.
It's particularly confusing because one thing to consider is when the dogs talk to each other, we hear it as English, or whatever language you're watching the film in. When they're barking with the Twilight Bark, that's not. So I think it's implied it's kind of like Morse code, but then I don't understand. Doesn't make any sense.
I thought for a second you were going to say it's confusing because, for me, whenever the dogs refer to barking, I think they're referring to the place.
That's confusing for you. In a film about dogs, you think when they're referring to barking, they're always referring to the place.
My brain, I hear southern accents mentioning the word barking. My brain just automatically assumes they're talking about the place.
Ridiculous. Twilight Bark reaches the countryside, and it reaches a dog and a goose. And you think, oh, this is kind of the point, is these guys are going to do something, but we have to dwell on them for a couple of minutes before they then pass on to somebody else. I don't know why we stop on them, to be honest. They don't contribute anything and we never see them again.
This is what I'm saying. This is 6.5 minutes of dogs barking. And I think this is why my brain tunes out at this point.
Well, they do pass it along. They pass it along to... It's a horse, a dog, and a cat. The horse is voiced by the excellently named Thurl Ravenscroft, who was the voice of Tony the Tiger. He also sang uncredited "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch" from the popular television version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And if you ever look him up, he looks just like Mr. House from Fallout New Vegas.
We also have, accompanying the horse, we have the Colonel, a sheepdog of some variety, voiced by J. Pat O'Malley, doing his classic interpretation of an army voice that he uses about 6 times amongst the Disney catalogue.
And they managed to trace the puppies to the old De Vil place, where Jasper and Horus are holed up, not with just the 15 puppies they stole from Anita and Roger, but another 84 puppies that they've acquired elsewhere. Now, here's my question, Liam. It's implied that Cruella bought the other 84 puppies. I don't think she ever says it explicitly, but this is the first crime they've committed, is the implication, right?
Yeah, I think explicitly one of the dogs mentions that they were all bought at the pet store.
And one also assumes that she's going to get away with wearing a Dalmatian skin coat, because obviously if you wear that in public, that's just going to get you arrested. There's no point doing it, right? So, literally, the only flaw in Cruella's plan is she steals these 15 specific puppies. She couldn't go and get another 15 puppies elsewhere. She couldn't just use the ones she had. If she hadn't have stolen these ones, she would be a law-abiding citizen, her driving accepted, obviously.
Ben, can I just say, have you ever tried to track down 99 Dalmatian puppies, all within a small time frame?
I haven't.
I'm surprised she managed to find 84.
Well, that's my point, though. She's managed 84. She'll be like, oh, that's enough.
She needs the hood for the coat.
Well, no, but she says she's making half a dozen coats. Just settle for 5. That's fine. I don't even own 5 coats, let alone 5 Dalmatian skin ones.
I'd also like to point out that I'm not sure if you've ever met a real-life Dalmatian, but their fur would not make a good coat.
It wouldn't. My other note on Dalmatians, which I know is weird that I've only got one on a film that's about Dalmatians, is a huge amount of Dalmatians are deaf, which means the Twilight bark just wouldn't work, because Pongo would be barking away and he'd go, well, God knows if they heard that.
So we see that Jasper and Horus are holed up in the old De Vil place out in Sussex, so they've managed to get a fair bit away. We have 99 puppies. I have a note that they seem to have a birthday cake for some reason.
I wrote exactly the same note. Why do they have a full birthday cake between them? Basically, we see they're just having like a sandwich each, Jasper's drinking from a wine bottle, and a full birthday cake. The other thing I like in this scene is one of the things that's on the TV is one of the old Silly Symphonies, Springtime. We see a little clip of that, which is just a nice little reference.
Also on the TV is probably the highlight of this scene, and potentially the film for me, which is a game show called What's My Crime? And if you're not familiar with BBC game shows from the 50s and 60s, they have nailed it.
I mean, What's My Line was a genuine show. I didn't know this when I was growing up, but I know it now. And yeah, it's that exact format where there's famous people, they're blindfolded, they're asking questions to try and ascertain who this famous person is and what they do. And they had all sorts of celebrities on it, Groucho Marx, Muhammad Ali, Salvador Dali, etc. And the premise of What's My Crime is they've got some random oath and people have to guess why he's in prison.
And if he manages to elude the panel, he'll win an all-expenses-paid vacation after his debt to society has been paid. It's a really nice little bit. It's exactly like the game shows of the time. And again, the character design is very grotesque. You've got people that are extremes of everything. We're moving away from the more muted fairy tale design of Sleeping Beauty, and we're now into this very sharp looking character design. That's not fair. I think the character designs in Sleeping Beauty are quite sharp, but they're not as grotesque and out there as what we see in 101 Dalmatians. And it applies to even the background small characters like those on the TV.
We skipped forward, but honestly, you're not missing much. Pongo and Perdita, they run to Sussex and they team up with
a very handsome collie.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the handsome collie. I'm just going to put a pin in that for later on in this podcast. And they team up and they break the puppies out with the help of Tibbs, the cat. It's almost ruined by Roly. Roly. They have a bit of a fight with Horus and Jasper, and they escape. Prior to this scene, one bit I really like is Cruella comes just to shout at them and say, "Come on, kill the puppies, get on with it." And she picks up Jasper's bottle and throws it in the fire and it just explodes. Which is just awesome. It explodes behind her and she just tanks it like a pro. The cool guys don't look at explosions meme is massively predated by Cruella.
She's just a ball of seething rage at all times, and it is incredible. The puppies are all broken out, rescued, I suppose would be the correct term. And at this point, the rest of the film is now just 101 Dalmatians returning to London across snowy Sussex. And it's fine.
I feel the balance in this film is really off. Because this happens in the last sort of 15 minutes of the film, maybe? I feel this should be happening around the 20-25 minute mark, and it should be more of an adventure. Because again, there's not really any character development in this. No one really changes throughout this film. It's just stuff happens. There's not even really a main character in it. You could say Pongo, but...
Or more should happen on the way to rescue them. I feel like Pongo and Perdita get there very quickly. Again, we waste 6.5 minutes on the Twilight Bark, and I don't think that much time is devoted to Pongo and Perdita getting out to Sussex.
No, we literally see them head off out of London. A guy goes, "Oh, I'll help you to Camden." Great, we're running to Sussex. That's not helping. And basically what we get is a series of Jasper and Horus being inept, Cruella getting increasingly angry, driving increasingly erratically.
I like throughout this last part of the film that Jasper, Horus and Cruella are questioning whether they're being outsmarted by the dogs. And obviously they are, but it's dismissed as being silly, but there are moments when they realise that that is exactly what is happening. And I think that's quite nice.
Yeah, I like the fact they never break that the dogs still act like dogs towards people. They always have the mannerisms of dogs as well, like they don't pick things up with their paws or anything, they're dogs. And yeah, I think that it's nice that we keep that level of this is what's going on in the dog's world and this is what's going on in the human world.
So as I say, I tend to tune out on this last part of the film, and I've only got a couple more notes. One of which is I'm always disturbed when the puppies drink milk straight from the cow.
It's disgusting. I don't know why, right? So basically they take shelter in a barn and there's some cows in there. The puppies say they're hungry, so the cows are like, "This one's on us." And the puppies just start drinking milk from them. I know, in principle, there's nothing weird about that. Humans drink milk, and obviously that's how mammals... But I don't know, it's just... The cows just seem a bit too happy about it. Maybe that's why I don't like it.
It's only bested by a weird milk scene in The Fox and the Hound, which we'll get to. I think there's 3 or 4 cows. Each of them has got 4 nipples. Is that the word of...
Udders.
Well, no, the udder is the whole thing. The nipple, the part of the udder?
Milk cannon.
The milk cannon. So there's 4 cows, 3 or 4 cows. Let's say 4. Each of them's got 4 milk cannons. That's only 16 milk cannons between 99 puppies. They'd be there for ages.
And one of them's Roly. So the Dalmatians are almost home and dry. There's a van that is driving down to London, and they disguise themselves as Labradors by rolling in soot and walking right past Cruella, Jasper and Horus. But as the last batch of puppies are heading to the van, the ice above them drips on them, washing the soot off. And Cruella, in incredulity, acknowledges that the puppies have been disguising themselves, and her, Jasper and Horus set off in their vehicles to try and ram this lorry off the road. Again, I don't know what her plan is here, because if the lorry goes off the cliff, those puppies' coats aren't going to be salvageable. What I really like is the fact this driver just goes with it. He's just like, oh, crazy woman, and just rams her back. He just gets on, he's like, oh, bloody driving through the countryside. He just accepts it as comes with the territory.
I like the van chase. Again, we can see at this point that Cruella is completely unhinged now and is so set in her goal. But I think at this point she's just annoyed that she's been outsmarted by dogs. And again, we get that lovely animation of the car. This is a good example to check out if you want to see what I'm talking about with the cardboard model, because throughout all of this segment, you can see the motion that they're getting out of using a model rather than animating lots of different cells. And after the crash, everything is just resolved.
Yeah, I feel this is kind of one of the main problems with this as a narrative is that, as I say, these characters don't have any character arcs. It's just the puppies get stolen, so they get them back. That's it. This finale epitomises that in that they're just riding in the van. It's the van driver who's doing anything related to that. And to be honest, it's mostly just Cruella, Jasper and Horus's ineptitude and poor driving that sabotages them. The dogs just happen to be there for it. Yeah, so Cruella gets rammed off the road by Jasper and Horus. I think you hear police sirens just vaguely in the background implying they're going to get caught. I like that Jasper is just so sick of Cruella just shouting at him, he just goes, shut up. I like that that's kind of the end of those characters.
And then we cut back to the modest London home where it's now Christmas. So I'm not sure what the time scale of this film is. I suppose it was snowing whilst they were escaping Sussex. But have they been gone long? Again, I'm not really sure of the time frame. I think they're trying to make us feel that a lot of time has passed by making it Christmas. So much happens in this film, and yet it feels like not very much happens at all.
Yeah, I feel this Lady and the Tramp, and especially the Aristocats, I kind of clump them together. In fact, when we get to the Aristocats, it's only a few films away. There's so much stuff that, in terms of structure, is reused, in terms of style is reused, in terms of plot is reused. Even in terms of art style a lot, like rewatching this, a lot of individual pieces of animation of animals moving, I swear is just reused verbatim in the Aristocats. And I'm pretty sure the truck driver is the same truck driver.
Most of the countryside is reused.
Just to annoy all the francophobic Brits.
So yeah, at this point, the 101 Dalmatians have managed to find their way back to London. And there's this nice little scene where Roger, Anita and Nanny have to count all the various dogs to see how many they now seem to have. And Roger just assumes these are all Pongos.
Yeah, he does. He's like, oh, you old scallywag. I was like, you shouldn't be proud of that, Roger, if you think that's what's happened.
Spay and neuter.
That's just what comes up as the last title card. Neuter your pets. So the finale is that they agree they'll take them all and have a Dalmatian plantation, and Roger sings a little song on the piano. I say a song, it's like a couple of lines, because they've made so much money off his hit song, Cruella De Vil, which means that his inspiration for the song, he's taken verbatim and just released as a single, which is weird on so many levels. First off, the idea of people just going, I love that song about that horrible woman. Two, like, obviously, I'm pretty sure there's some libel issues there because she's a real person and you're just slagging her off. And three, imagine saying to your partner who you love, look, I've written a song about your friend and how horrible they are. I'm gonna make a lot of money off it. It's just so weird.
I wonder as well what became of Cruella. As you said, the last we see of her, she's in a ditch and we hear police sirens coming. So has she been arrested? If the puppies being kidnapped made front page news, would the trial of Cruella De Vil make front page news? And is that why the song was successful? But as you say, it's in poor taste. It would be as if
the Manson family, the Manson family. And that is 101 Dalmatians. Overall, I think it's fine. I would say this might be the most mediocre Disney film of the lot.
I would go a step further, and I think of the films we have seen so far, excluding the absolute trash of the package films, I think this is the worst film we've watched so far. And again, even with the package films, there are things I like in the package films. Here, other than the art style and the animation of the car, I just zone out and I don't really care for this film.
I think that's fair. I think this and some of the other films we've got coming up, I feel that a lot of people have very fond memories of them because I think they're geared more towards a very young audience. Obviously, Disney is geared towards a young audience in general, but normally there's stuff in there for adults, whereas I feel these films, they're very safe, they're very accessible for children, but rewatching them, I don't think there's a lot you're going to get out of there, with the exception of What's My Crime, which is genuinely funny.
Yeah, What's My Crime? The character animations I do think are very good. I just think they're let down by the animation process itself, and the few snippets of songs we get are excellent. But that's about it. I will also say I'm a little biased against the Dalmatians because in Kingdom Hearts 1, one of the major side quests is you have to find all 99 Dalmatian puppies that have gone missing, and they're just hidden in various chests throughout the world. And every time you rescue so many of them, you go visit Pongo and Perdita in their massive mansion, and they give you a present. The humans are nowhere to be seen. You're just greeted by these dogs gifting you presents. It's just a very annoying RPG side quest that I associate now with the 101 Dalmatians.
Much like my perception of everything in Kingdom Hearts, it sounds interminable. And with that, we have covered 101 Dalmatians. Liam, is there anything else we need to discuss before we look at whether this film makes it onto the list?
Before we can decide whether or not this goes onto the list, we just need to decide who we think might be the sexiest character in 101 Dalmatians. So Ben, who is the sexiest character in 101 Dalmatians, and are they human?
Right. Let's just give some qualifying statements here. We normally look at this in terms of most sexualized character, because I think if you were going for just out-and-out sexy, like, the idea is Roger and Anita are just good-looking, upper-middle-class socialites. I feel Cruella is kind of meant to be that, in that she's, as I say, she's got the incredibly high cheekbones and, like, the big smile, but obviously it's kind of a grotesque and a parody, which leaves us with the dogs. I feel you and I have had too many conversations in our life, Liam, about sexy dogs, but where do you fall on this?
As I mentioned earlier, I think the collie is a particularly handsome collie, but we're not judging handsomeness, we're judging sexiness. And I will say it's hard for me to rule out Roger. Maybe it's a personal thing, but there's something about a tall, waspy man with a big nose that just really does it for me. But I think that would fall more into personal preference. Again, they used Roger as the basis for the main character in Paperman, so clearly they were onto something with that character design.
Well, Liam, I feel we're circling round Perdita as the answer then, with her big long eyes.
Yeah, I was delaying getting to it, but I think Perdita's a sexy dog. I know my sexy dogs, and Perdita is up there among the sexiest of dogs.
If this podcast ever gains any real traction, it's either going to be because we've got the right mix of analysis and entertainment, or because we're known as the two creepy guys who talk about how sexy the dogs are.
The real question is whether Perdita will remain the sexiest dog on this list. There are some sexy dogs coming our way in the future.
Well, that's for the future. For now, Liam, does 101 Dalmatians make it onto the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
You might be surprised by my answer, but no.
But you probably weren't surprised then.
No. I did only say might.
Yeah, I'm going to have to second that. As I say, I feel it's very mediocre. I think it's a very safe film. I don't think it takes a lot of risks. I feel it does lay the groundwork for what we're going to see later in the 60s. But yeah, I couldn't in good faith put it on.
Yeah, there have been some controversial omissions so far, and I think it would be a disservice to all of those films if 101 Dalmatians even entered into consideration. So I think it's unanimous, and neither of us want to put it onto the list.
But of course, those are just our opinions. Do you feel we should have given 101 Dalmatians more love? Is it a beloved classic for you?
Is Pongo the sexier of the two dogs?
Objectively not, but maybe you think that. Look, if we get through all these, we'll do a podcast where we just rank all the dogs in all Disney films, from sexiest to least sexiest. But until then, we have finished talking about this. Liam, what are we looking at next time?
Well, Ben, next time we are taking a look at 1963's The Sword in the Stone. I'll say in advance, this is one of those films that I watched excessively as a child, so I am very keen to revisit it and see how it holds up. But we will have to see. And with that, that is our discussion of 101 Dalmatians. Thank you for listening, and join us next time for The Sword in the Stone.